Tonight I wanted to show you a few techniques that I kind of learned by myself over the years on how to play instruments on a keyboard. For example, how to reproduce an acoustic guitar or a bass or brass or strings and so forth in a way that doesn't sound too unnatural. And basically the main idea is just to use your ears and kind of emulate how the real instrument would play in the real world. We're going to use a Kurzweil K2500 RS, which is a rec version of the Kurzweil K2500. Let's get to it. Okay, first up is the acoustic guitar on the keyboard. I'm using the steel string guitar patch on the Kurzweil, which is a pretty old patch, but it's still really good. It's from the 90s, but it still sounds great. It's from the K2000. This is it. Now, what I observed over the years is that you want to play like a guitar player would, so you don't want to play like a piano player. For example, a piano player would play block chords, you know, like this. And it doesn't sound like a guitar. It sounds more like, a harpsichord, really. Plucked strings, but it doesn't sound like guitar. You may want to play something like along these lines instead. So this technique, how does it work? Guitar players usually they use the thumb to play the bass notes and the other fingers of their right hand to play the rest of the chords. Or if it's finger picking, also they do that. I replicate this technique. You could do it with using one hand only. You could do something like this. But I found that using two hands is better. I usually use my left hand to play the thumb part, and my right hand to play the chords, basically. And I would do it like this. I would play, for a finger picking style, I would do something like. So basically you emulate a guitar player that does like down 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 da 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 da, or da 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 da, so forth. And you want to also use the pedal to help you, and you could sound something like this. Then another component that I found is this roll. Check out these chords, and it sounds pretty realistic. How to do that? You have to roll the keyboards. You don't want to think like a piano player. For example, for these types of block chords, on a piano, let's call up a piano patch. You play something straight like this on a piano, like this. Sounds really nice on a piano. It does not work on an acoustic guitar. It just doesn't sound realistic. It would sound like this. because in the physical world, when a guitar player strikes the strings, it's like a gradual thing. You know, there is a little bit of delay between each string being struck. So if you roll it, it sounds a lot more realistic, like this. And then you can alternate strums with finger picking, something like this. Alright, that should be enough for the steel string guitar. Let's move on to the next instrument. Next, we can do the banjo, and I'm using the Green Acres patch on the Kurzweil. And again, it's a very similar technique to the guitar that I'm using. I'm going to play fast first, and then I'm going to break it down and show you how I do this. So, you know, the banjo, it could be like something like... Alright, it's the same concept exactly. I'm just going fast. So if you're just starting out with keyboards, again, it's the same thing. The banjo has 4 strings, and you typically use the thumb for the bass notes and the other 3 for the top notes. So to play this little 3 chords pattern, what I do, I again use my left hand to play the bass note and this hand to play the other 3 strings. And you can start slowly doing something like this, you know, something like this. You don't have to play the same notes I'm playing, of course. You can play any notes you want. But for this exercise, this is what I did. Something like that. Yeah, I'm playing very simple chords. I'm playing, you know, the C, the F, and then the C again, and then the D, and then the G. These are simple chords. But when you do it fast, you have to pick up the speed, basically, and emulate what a banjo player would sound like. You know, it's not going to be 100%. This is not a science. I'm just going by ear. But it kind of sounds similar. So, you know, you would start like slowly, like that. And then when you pick up the pace, Alright, the next one we're going to talk about is the orchestral strings, and I'm using the Stereo Slow Strings patch on the Kurzweil. And again, it's more of the same. You want to try to remember what strings sound like when you hear an orchestra, And basically, again, you want to avoid playing like a piano player, like a keyboard player. You don't want to play like a lot of, like 10 notes, huge chords like this. Because it's gonna sound like a synth pad, not like a real orchestra, string orchestra. I've always read that to emulate strings, you should think about lines, strings lines that carry, 3 notes or 4 notes at max. And you can double them in the bass to emulate, the cellos and the basses. But you want to think along these lines instead. Let's try something like this. And I'm just playing groups of 3 or 4 notes at max, and it sounds more realistic this way. And I'm also using ritardando and also some suspended chord. It's always good to do a suspended chord, like to create tension and resolve it. Something like if you want to resolve from a D chord on the strings, you may want to put something like a G in there and resolve it later to create tension, something like. Okay, next up is the choir, and when I think of choirs, I always think about assigning the male component, which is lower in pitch, usually on the left hand, and the female component on the right hand. And again, it's a very similar technique that I use for the strings as well, with simple chords of really 2 or 3 notes. And so I would have, on the left hand, I would have the male vocal, something like this. And on the right hand, I would have. And then again, you would do ritardandos and suspensions, and something along these lines I would play. Alright, let's take a look at the flute, and I'm using the Wendy's flute patch on the Kurzweil. And again, to emulate the flute, I try to think as myself as a flute player, and this patch is actually set in polyphonic mode, which is useful if you want to play polyphonic flute passages such as, like but usually, most of the time, the flute is a monophonic instrument, so we might want to go in and edit this patch to set it to monophonic. So we go to the common here, monophonic is off, turn it on, and now it's monophonic. And it's got portamento on, let's turn the portamento off. So now the patch is monophonic, and again, you want to try to basically use your ears, guys. Use your ears to try to sound like a flute player would. Think of yourself as a flute player, so I would do something like maybe... And I would let's remember that flute players need to breathe, so you've got to stop every now and then to breathe. Okay, we can do the saxophone, and again, we want to try to sound in the same range of a saxophone. I'm using the soft tenor sax for this patch on the Kurzweil, and I'm just going to play the Pink Panthers. That's something that everybody knows. I would do something, and it's important to use the pitch bend, and if your keyboard has it, the aftertouch to introduce vibrato, or basically the better the sample. These samples are from the 90s, really. They're super good. Kurzweil did an amazing job, but nowadays with the modern plugins you have even better sounds. So let's take a look. We'll be doing something like acting on the pitch bend wheel as well, and the modulation and the aftertouch. And basically in this patch I'm using the aftertouch to control the volume. When I press harder, there's more volume, just like a real sax players would. And then you could play bebop. For that, you could use the same rules that are valid for a piano player, because in reality, like bebop, jazz, they do want to copy the brass and the reeds because they want it to sound like that, something like jazzy lines. The same type of sound that you would do on the piano, something like you could replicate that on the sax, because pretty much it's the same concept. Trumpet. I'm using the Miles unmuted sound, which goes like this. And again, this is programmed in polyphonic mode. Let's set it to monophonic because the trumpet is. Edit. Common. Turn monophonic on. And let's leave legato. It's got legato on. So again, as a trumpet player, you want to try to emulate what a trumpet player would do. And it's good to have legato because you can do the legato stuff like the trumpet does, something like the trills. So you could play something like and again, you can use the aftertouch to introduce the LFO, the vibrato, and or the volume, and do the phrasing that sounds like a trumpet, jazzy or pop, whatever you want. And you can do these elephant things like the trumpet players do. Alright, here's the harp, and here's one really easy way that anybody can do it to play the harp, and it's the typical If you want to do a little bit more than that, you know, in the 90s, there was when I came to America, there was a show on TV where this guy was selling keyboards, and he was playing the harp sound on these Casio keyboards back in the 90s. I don't remember his name, but I kind of copied what he was doing. He was playing these chords here. And when you press the pedal, it does sound like a harp. You can play this chord in any key if you want, but it's kind of so I play these notes here, and you can find the relation in every key. Also, an interesting thing, when I was a child, you know, harp, what a lot of times harp players, what do they play? Arpeggios. Why? Because the Italian word for harp is arpa, hence the Italian word arpeggio. Eh? That's how it goes. Basically, an arpeggio is the act of playing the arpa, the harp. And when I was a kid in the Italian TV, there was, you know, everybody of my generation who's listening to this will recognize this because it was the interval of the Rai TV back in the 70s, went something like this. Which is really a piece by Handel. And I love this piece when I was a child, and I always try to replicate it playing arpeggios. Okay, next is a marimba patch on the Kurzweil 2K2500. And the marimba, for what I've observed over the years, the marimba players use 2 or 4 what do you call them, sticks. I don't even know what they're, mallets, I guess, on the marimba, and to create trills. And to do that on the keyboard, I usually basically use 2 fingers. It's really easy to do. If you have 2 mallets, you can do something like this. What you can do is the thumb and the index finger. Whichever fingers work for you. Oh, Rosser! That's an internal Nanoline joke. Or you can do 4, do the same thing with 4 fingers. Just play like this, or you can play jazz it. Alright, let's do one more, the bass, electric bass. And it's cool to have a patch like this dual E-bass on the Kurzweil that basically at normal velocity it plays the finger bass, and if you play harder there's a velocity switch that engages the slap, the pop sound, such as this. So you could play like a bass player would, something like. Alright guys, that's it for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the content, and if there is anything you'd like to see, just let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to do a video about it. As usual, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you the next time.